So today we're focusing on our evidence review of social innovation labs. Hopefully you've all joined the right call, otherwise it's your chance to leave now. So back a few months ago in January now, we published our evidence review in collaboration with Innovation Unit. And in it, we explore what labs are, how they achieve impact now, and how they achieve more impact in the future. All essential questions we've been asking ourselves for many years in Q and the Q Lab team. And so for those of you who are slightly less familiar with our work, here in Q, one of our main offers is the Q Lab programme, and we commissioned Innovation Unit to undertake this review to help us consider the future direction for Q Lab. So it's probably helpful here to give a bit of background about Q and Q Lab. So many of you in the room may be part of Q already, but for those of you who aren't, Q is a community of over 5,000 people in the UK and Ireland, collaborating to improve health and care. Q is free to join, and it's led by the Health Foundation and supported by partners across the UK and Ireland. And the community really thrives on its diverse range of skills, knowledge and perspectives. And there are some links on the screen to find out more about Q. And here at Q, we've got one simple aim. We want to make it easier for people to share, learn and collaborate, because we believe that's key to successful health and care improvement. So within Q, we developed Q Lab in response to the challenge of designing improvement and innovation at scale in complex health and care challenges. So our lab brings people together to develop, test and implement solutions to issues that span health and care. So previous lab projects have focused on digital and improvement, and our current lab project is exploring how we might reduce delays in elective pathways. And just a bit of an introduction about how the Q Lab works, and I appreciate I could chat for the whole session just on this one slide. But in Q Lab, we foster collaboration that really combines, again, diverse skills and perspectives and gives people the tools and expertise to tackle complex shared problems. So our approach involves convening people from across different parts of health and care around shared priority topics, as I've just mentioned, supporting teams to creatively design and test solutions, so enabling them to experiment and learn in a supported environment and implementing ideas in practice. We build in time for reflective learning and sense-making, helping people to really understand more about the problem and the wider system that they're operating in, rather than just jumping to solutions. And that's a real tension we find ourselves sort of relaying quite a lot. And finally, we distill and share the most relevant learning to a wider audience. So our evidence review, as I've said, in collaboration with Innovation Unit, was published a few months ago, and some of you may have recently read it, whilst others may not have read it for a while. So Libby and Christina will be sharing some of the context and key findings shortly. And as I said, we commissioned this to really develop our strategy and approach for Q Lab. And we've already been using some of the really useful insights from the review to inform some of our strategic conversations. And we'll be continuing to use these as we develop our future work. And we hope that they'll really help you too. So it's been great to work with Innovation Unit. And I'm just going to hand over to Christina now to give us a bit of an introduction as well.
Thanks, Serena. Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Christina Cornwell. I'm a senior associate and work with the Innovation Unit. We were delighted to be commissioned to undertake this evidence review, and in a bit I'll be telling you a little bit more about what we did and what we found. But just so you know who we are, Innovation Unit is an innovation consultancy. We're a social enterprise, and we've got a very particular mission to help to grow and scale the boldest and best innovations that deliver impact for people, address persistent inequalities and transform the systems that surround them. So we bring together a range of different methods and approaches. We draw a lot on social innovation and service design, but also co-production and systems change alongside other methods as well. And we're particularly focused on helping our partners across health and care and beyond in children and family services and social justice and climate, to really try and tackle the sort of problems of today whilst growing sustainable solutions for the future and helping them to build safe and credible pathways between the two. I put our website there and we'll drop it in the chat, and I'm very happy to be contacted if people want to know more about us. But for now, I'll hand over to Libby to introduce more about the evidence review.
Cool. You're actually going to be handing back to me just for a couple more slides. No, that's fine. So just to cover really what we'll be doing today. So obviously we'll be exploring the evidence review findings, meeting and connecting with others who have an interest in social innovation. And we'll be hearing from two of our wonderful interviewees, Anna and Charlotte, who we're really pleased to have with us today. And finally, we'll be reflecting on what it means for you and your work. So what are some of the things that you can take away? And just to note, as you can see, we'll be in a mix of different mindsets and modes today, some listening, some reflecting, some talking. And we know that people have different preferences for each of these, but we hope what we've designed really meets your needs. And ultimately, we just want to stimulate some good thinking, which will ultimately lead to some good conversations. Saying all of that, I know you're hearing a lot from me just now, but I just want to do a quick energizer activity to get us all warmed up and to see the breadth of experience we have on this call. So I'm just going to show a couple of questions on the next slides, one by one, and we would like you to pop your instinctive answers in the chat box. There's no right or wrong. We're just interested in hearing your honest reflections. So the first question is, what drew you here today? What drew you here? Wonderful. Curiosity, great. To connect and learn. Shared learning, lots of learning. Oh, welcome, Alison, new member to CUE, first opportunity to join a CUE meeting. Really glad to have you here. Lots of curiosity words coming up. Exploring impact. Intrigued by the title of the talk. Wonderful. We hope we can give you some more insights into it. Yeah, really interested in finding out a bit more about learning from the labs process, an opportunity for new connections. Wonderful. I'll give a couple more seconds. Yeah, lots of interest in shared learning, which is great. This is exactly what this space is here for you to connect. Yeah, Liz, that's really, really helpful. It'd be really interesting in the breakout discussions to hear more about all of your different innovation and improvement work. Lots of labs. Glad you found the report very honest and refreshing, Andrew. Perfect. So keep the responses coming in the chat. There's quite a few questions. So the next one is, what do you hope to get from today, if that's any different from the response you've just given now? To gain new understanding. Yeah, increase knowledge of innovation labs and their practical uses. Yeah, lots of thoughts, new thinking, new insights, connections. Finding out about things you don't already know, Des, that's helpful. And finding out what's happening elsewhere. Perfect. Yeah, lessons learned, how you take this evidence forward in your strategy, and finding out about effective ways of integrating innovation to improve health and social care. Wonderful. Great. So just moving on to the next question. So this is the one that I'd like to get your really honest responses to. What does a social innovation lab mean to you? Remember, no right or wrong responses. It's just very interesting to see what's coming up. I'm not fully sure, which is why I signed up. Mark, that's good to know. Coming together to innovate. Yeah. That is absolutely fine. Not ignorant at all if you don't have a clue. It's really, this is the space to hear more. Yeah, place and space to generate ideas, test and learn. Place to support good ideas to thrive. Exploring innovative solutions, collaboration, testing, learning. Yeah. Really helpful to hear and see your reflections. And then I guess it's sort of the next question uh, leads on from this a little bit. So how familiar are you with social innovation labs or methods? Are you fairly familiar? Have you worked um, with them a long time, or is it not very familiar? Yeah, not unfamiliar. Okay. Yeah, good point, Lynn. We've used a lot of the techniques without calling it a lab. That's really interesting reflection, something we hear quite a lot as well. Not familiar at all, getting there. And it's great that some of you are joining actually from outside health and care, and please bring that experience into the discussions today. It will be really, really valuable. Yeah, familiar with frustrated with the way it lands sometimes. Great. And then finally, what is it that you want to hear or learn more about today? The what and how? Harnessing the power of patient user voice. Yeah, best practice, what's really working. To see if I can contribute. Perfect. What I would say, and I didn't say at the beginning, but during the breakout group discussions that we're going to have today, they are fairly informal. We've got some prompt questions, but there's so many common themes that are already coming out in the chat. So really encourage you to connect with others and just to explore what you're doing in your various fields and organisations. So hopefully it'd be really valuable for you all. Great. I'm going to pass over to Libby now to lead the next part.
Awesome, thank you, Serena. So anyone who I haven't yet met before, my name is Libby and I'm head of the QLab network. And I'm just going to give a couple of minutes kind of context really for how the evidence review came about. And then you'll be hearing from Christina, who's going to share some of the kind of key findings that will hopefully answer a couple of the questions that were coming up for people in that Energizer. So QLab, as you've already heard from Serena, is an offer that we run in Q. It's been running since about 2017, although we did have some quite big pauses around the early parts of COVID. And in the early years, when we were kind of first setting up QLab, we did a lot of research to understand the field of social innovation labs and how a lab that was kind of positioned within an improvement community like Q would operate. And I think there probably will be some people on the call who were involved in some of the co-design sessions that we ran with members, and also our first lab that we ran as a pilot that was looking at how to scale peer support in health and care. And obviously kind of over time, our learning has increased. With each lab, we've done a lot of iteration, looking at what has and hasn't worked and how to improve, leaning heavily on our evaluation partners and also kind of evolving our theory of change as we've gone along. And we then kind of commissioned this evidence review because we wanted to do a kind of a bigger and a broader stock take of how the literature and practice around social innovation labs had evolved since those kind of early days that we were setting up QLab. And it means that kind of when you look at the content in the evidence review, it's quite heavily focused on the kind of evolving practice of labs and how they are continuing to respond to the needs of the system and the places that they're operating in. And we wanted the findings to really help inform some of the direction that we take in QLab. And we were also, I guess, really hoping that some of the information would be interesting for a potentially pretty niche audience who are also interested in either social innovation or different ways to achieve systems change. And it's definitely been a real delight for us since we published it earlier this year, seeing how many people are taking useful lessons from what's discussed, even if, as people were just kind of commenting, you're not necessarily directly involved in a lab, but some of the learning definitely feels really wider than that. So yeah, really looking forward to the conversation with all of you today. So I'll kind of, pass on to Christina, who's going to go into some of the meat of what the evidence review uncovered.
Thank you, Libby. So, as Serena and Libby have said, we were commissioned to undertake this review of the evidence of social innovation labs, and we're asked to particularly focus on the literature that was relevant to health and care in a UK context. We knew that was going to be somewhat challenging and that the evidence base would be kind of patchy and emergent and multifaceted. So we used our 3 fields of knowledge framework, which looks to bring together evidence from a range of different sources, from research, but also practice, as well as first-hand experience. So from the published academic literature, we conducted a systematic review of the evidence that was focused on social innovation labs in health and care in the UK, which was pretty scarce. So we supplemented it with a pragmatic review of evidence that took in evidence from the wider UK public sector, as well as about health and care from an international perspective. We also looked at the grey literature, so we looked at information from think tanks and information published by innovation labs themselves, blogs and other papers. And we were really fortunate to interview some fantastic practitioners who brought experience and expertise and insights from both within the health and care sector in the UK, as well as beyond, from public services and from international innovation. And we're really delighted to have Anna Burney and Charlotte Williams with us today and to hear from them a little bit later. Next slide, please. So first of all, we had to ask, well, what is a lab and what do we mean by social innovation? And actually, as some of you have sort of pointed out in the chat, even defining what is a lab is not, or what is a social innovation lab is not entirely straightforward. We saw a real diversity in terms of form and function, as well as teams using really similar approaches that don't necessarily use the language of labs. What we did find is that they tend to be focused on creating and testing new ideas in complex situations, like where there are wicked problems and no easy solutions, as some of you think has also put in the lab in the chat. And we found that they tend to share 5 similar features. So they all provide some kind of space. It might be a physical space where people can come together and explore and sense make together, or a social space for building new connections, or indeed an imaginary space for kind of exploring new mental models that are kind of islands of collaboration, experimentation that kind of sit outside the sort of formal structures and systems of an organisation or place. They also tend to draw very heavily on design-led approaches and methods, but also draw in a range of different methods and disciplines, most notably systems thinking, but also participatory and action research, data analysis, and behavioural insights. Not surprisingly, given the name, they tend to be all about experimentation and very much sort of trying to come together to develop new hypotheses, developing and testing interventions, and often use methods around prototyping, where you're looking for kind of quick and easy ways of kind of rapidly testing new ideas to sort of see how they might land in a real world context. They involve a lot of co-design and co-production, bringing together people from very diverse perspectives and different disciplines so that they can kind of get those different views around different problems and exploring what different solutions might look like. And importantly, they also tend to draw heavily on human-centered practice. So that's kind of similar to co-design and co-production, but is a really core to how they try to understand the experiences of people and organizations and how to really develop and design solutions that meet their needs and to design them with them. Now, those features won't be unique to labs, and many of you will be using lots of them in your own innovation and improvement practices. But I think if you've got all of those, you won't find a lab that isn't using all of those approaches in some way. And so it's worth also defining what do we mean by social innovation. And we use this definition from Nesta that describes social innovation as products, services, or models that both meet social needs and create new social relationships or collaborations. So they're both social in their ends, what they're trying to achieve and the outcomes that they're achieving, but also the means. And often the process of innovation itself is highly participatory and collaborative as well. And they may generate financial value, but that's not necessarily their main purpose. And actually just focusing on social innovations in the health and social care context was also particularly challenging because a lot of the evidence tends to be focused more on a kind of acute sector and clinical context as well. And next slide, please, Irina. So it was very difficult to be definitive about the impact and to answer the core question that we were set around, do they work? Because there's actually so much diversity in the sector, but also very little impact evaluation evidence. Nonetheless, the evidence did point to 3 really key areas of impact. And perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of the published evidence, particularly that published by labs themselves, points to the successful generation of new innovations, where labs tend to define success around impact and outcomes for people, but also on the spread and sustainability of those innovations, whether they've been sold on or spread on to other places as well. We also found that success was very broadly defined around the central role of labs creating new connections and connecting new stakeholders. And often people talked about those impacts being greater than the sum of the individual projects, in fact, and having kind of lasting impacts on shifting cultures and building capability and resilience within systems. And there's also a clear emphasis on the impact of labs on creating learning environments and supporting people to develop new skills and capabilities. And sometimes this is directly through providing education and training offers, but also I think it's through the kind of participation and involvement in innovation work itself, building that kind of human infrastructure that supports staff and partners to experience new ways of working and kind of shift their expectations about what's acceptable and what's possible. Next slide, please, Irina. We did find, however, that there were a lot of tensions and trade-offs and challenges for labs and how you define them. A really key one, which I've just touched on, was around evaluation and impact. Traditional evaluation approaches, tend to prioritize experimental methods and using quantitative measures to try and get to causality and replicability. But those kind of approaches tend to be at odds with the more emergent, iterative and kind of boundary pushing work that labs are often engaged in. So where there are evaluations of lab work, they tend to be more qualitative and they tend to mirror the kind of action research approaches that they use. But as we'll say in a minute, that's not to say that they shouldn't give up, and we think there's a real opportunity to develop new approaches to evaluation that kind of fit the ethos and approaches that labs use. Similarly, there can be a tension for how labs interact with and sit within and alongside traditional policy and research paradigms, which tend to favour sort of scientific methods and sort of more traditional hierarchies of knowledge, rather than the sort of design methodologies that get used by labs, which embrace risk and uncertainty and try to create something new. But what we did find was that where they're working really well, they've often found ways of collaborating, integrating, bringing together the kind of rigorous research methods from other partners alongside the kind of creativity and flexibility from lab approaches. We found it could be particularly challenging for labs if they, or indeed their stakeholders, are unclear about what their role is intended to be, if their focus is sort of too broad or their expectations are perhaps too high, particularly with regards to kind of implementation. And ideally, they want to try and find a sort of bit of a sweet spot where they're kind of clear on purpose, but they've still got that flexibility to continue to push boundaries and kind of challenge the sort of the edges and kind of the ambitions of places and systems. We also found that labs can sometimes be within or outside organisations and systems, and that both have some advantages and disadvantages. But most of the people we talked to really talked about the importance of straddling internal and external perspectives and being external enough to really offer a space for outside participation and reflection, but sort of internal enough to get a kind of deep understanding of the problems that are faced and to be able to create really credible solutions. And finally, a real tension for labs is that they need to have a mandate and the autonomy and freedom to sort of generate disruptive ideas, but they need to also show that they're relevant and useful and can help to achieve strategic aims of organisations and systems. And that's where we find some of the emergent kind of work in labs around things like prevention, for example, where systems have set kind of really ambitious goals about shifting to more preventative approaches, but often don't have existing kind of mechanisms or ways of doing that. And their labs are really helpful at kind of generating new ideas and really testing new ways of working. And finally, just a couple of pointers on kind of future potential for labs. talked a lot about the one on the right, about the importance of developing new approaches to measurement and evaluation that can really help to push on the evidence base for innovation labs, and that really kind of values what they bring around learning and around progress and around shifting culture, rather than just thinking about attributing sort of outputs to outcomes and so on. And also some really interesting thinking, and I like this quote from Jasper Christensen about seeing a shift from labs as structures and projects to labs as a mentality and culture, and thinking about how you really maximise the opportunity of existing labs, but also connect those assets and initiatives that are already there to maximise opportunities for learning across the wider system. That was it from me.
Right, now we'll stop sharing the slides now, and I think, Christina, you're just going to go through a bit of some conversation with our interviewees, so Anna and Charlotte, who we've already introduced. I'll just have very quickly to show their roles and job titles, but I'm sure you'll get to that in this conversation before we stop sharing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much. Lovely to be joined by Anna and Charlotte, and we were very grateful to both of you for taking part in the evidence review. Anna and Bernie is the Chief Executive, the CEO, I should say, the Chief Experience and Evolving Officer. I love that title. And of, I've forgot the School for Systems Change. And also we're joined by Charlotte Williams, who I think you're in like week 2 or something of your new job as Deputy Chief Executive Officer of North West Anglia Foundation Trust. So I'm going to want to start, perhaps if I start with you, Anna, could you tell us a bit about what is your role or association with Social Innovation Labs, and what do labs mean to you?
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. So over the years, I guess I'll just confess, I'm a bit of a process geek. So I love the how of change, not just the what of change. And as such, I have run a lab within an organization. So run a systems change lab within an organization, also set up labs, collaborative labs of initiatives that are outside of organizations as well. And now as my role in the School of Systems Change, we work with a lot of different type of initiatives, trying to do different things, some of them labs, some of them not, some of them innovation, some of them action research, some of them of varying degrees, but always asking that question of how do we create systems change. So I guess I'm kind of have experience of both understanding the field of practices of labs, and then also how do we start looking at and applying that. We've actually been looking at how we apply it to health as well. So we also run programs across the health system. I've looked to understand the change, and we've run about 3 or 4 courses. Actually, the final day of the 2024 course is actually open today for our health in systems change course as well. So bring some of that experience to this as well. Was that just the question? Did that answer your question?
That's great. Yeah, there's just one thing you said there, which would be, I wonder if you could just say a bit more about, is where you talked about some of the work that you currently do, and you said that some of it is labs and some of it's not. And I wonder whether you could just very briefly say a little bit about what that means in your context and how you define when it is and isn't a lab.
Yeah, I mean, so we always start with the question of what's the right approach and approach for whatever the big challenge that we're dealing with. So if we've got a question of change, we've got something we want to change in the world, like, and usually it's sort of that big a systems change, the question should always be is how do we actually approach that? What's the right approach? And some of those could be lab orientated, and some of those could be, we actually ran an initiative called Constellating Change. It's like, what's the right constellation? Is it a movement? Is it a collaboration? Is it an internal initiative? What's the right way to create change? And that should always be almost like the big, I guess I always zoom out, that's almost the first question. And sometimes, and I think that was your second question about what do we mean by labs, I think labs are almost something that is slightly more protected to create that space for experimentation and learning, to create the space to actually kind of have a concerted effort. But as you said from Jasper's quote, a lot of the work on labs has shifted from very protected spaces, like hard boundaries on what a lab is, to kind of almost a lab culture, a lab attitude, like how do you have a place? And we actually went through that process when I ran a systems change lab inside Forum for the Future, where we went from having to really protect that practice, really kind of cultivate a unique space, to actually being, and we actually dissolved the lab eventually, which we called it the Cultivate team, well, function in the organization, where we actually said we actually want to bring that experimentation and learning approach across the whole organization. So there's always this interesting question of where is it best sat? And I think a lot of labs now in the field are starting to ask that question, like living labs, what does that look like? Are they, and then we actually set up a collaborative for marine issues called the Marine CoLab, was actually, it was an area where multiple organizations could come together to innovate and experiment between different organizations rather than within organizations, to kind of help address some of those bigger systemic questions.
Brilliant, thank you. That's so interesting. Charlotte, can I come to you, and could you tell us what your role is in association with Social Innovation Labs and what Labs means to you?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm Charlotte Williams. I'm day 5 in a new job, but I'm in the report, having been interviewed in my previous role in Mid and South Essex NHS Foundation Trust, which I've recently left. So in that role, I suppose you could say I was an architect. It was sort of an in-house NHS innovation lab of a kind. We started looking at innovation as kind of a concept or a set of behaviours that could help to bring together our 3 hospital trusts, who were at the time working as a group, weren't a single organisation, and wanted to effectively kind of cultural and organisational change, and use the power of improvement and innovation together to do that. So we set up the MSE, or Mid and South Essex Innovation Programme, in 2017. And supported that as really in quite an unstructured way, without necessarily any specific items or innovators embedded within it, to see what would happen, and built that over about 5 years into quite a big function now, in terms of trying to explain how we can do this in situ in the NHS without really any new resources. So it still remains the same size that it was in 2018 in terms of headcount, but we've been able to build off that to develop other elements of the lab, for want of a better word. So we now become partners in and collaborators in the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Training Programme, which is for people working in and with health and care patients in the voluntary sector in England, to develop innovations and retain them. So this is about how we get outcomes from this sort of practice, which are more about people rather than products. And we've also been now through that been able to launch a programme called Insights, which is looking at how other NHS organisations, particularly it has been provider organisations, but we're now working with systems as well, think about the adoption of, in this case, entrepreneur developed innovations, but innovation in general, in situ, to test and learn, adopt if that's right, but mainly really about engaging with innovators and helping NHS staff really to change how they work and learn from innovators. So I suppose for me, labs are about how do we give people who work in our health service and care services a bit of oxygen, a bit of creativity and opportunity to work with innovation and develop that into their practice. And how we see that kind of come through. And we've tried to have a bit of a social value focus on what Mid and South Essex does, linking it to our health inequalities and anchor institution programme, as that's probably fitted best with our strategic objectives in the area and helped us to engage. So the programme is actually integrated care system wide, and has a number of collaborators within it, including local enterprise and voluntary sector.
Fantastic. And a lot of, if people can access some of that work online, it's a huge amount to learn. It's fantastic. It'd be great for people to find out more about it. Did you consciously avoid the use of the lab term, or it's interesting that you haven't particularly called yourself the lab? Is there any reason for that?
Yes, I mean, it's something we've deliberately not really labelled it at all. I think partly because a sort of hubris element of you don't really know from one day to the next if you're going to be allowed to exist in the NHS. There's kind of this having an innovation programme is something people recognise and understand, that it's about taking things forward. It also feels relatively non-threatening, and it feels like a sort of temporary structure that could evolve. So, it was a pragmatic decision. Also, I think a lot of people are very cynical about some of these terms in frontline NHS services, and that's not to demean anybody in any way. I think we wanted to just keep things as familiar to the patch where we were as possible. So it took on a similar sort of naming to other things going on within Mid and South Essex at the time, and we never really seen a need to change it. The Insights programme has got that particular acronym because we worked with NHS England to find a way to distinguish that. So you could say we've got an insight within Mid and South Essex, but that's set up slightly separately to the local programme. I had worked in the Academic Health Science Centre before. I came from UCL Partners before I moved into Mid and South Essex. And much as I really think the Health Innovation Network is amazing in what they do, it's slightly different. And I think they're creating something that sounds a little bit other to the trust itself and the system itself was perhaps preventing some of the broader engagement within the patch. So it was intentional.
That's really interesting and mirrors some of those findings that we had about the kind of insider-outsider perspectives and how it lands as well. So can I just ask you, Charlotte, was there anything in the evidence review or through the process that you particularly found helpful or sparked any new thoughts about your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I hate to say it, but sometimes you just crack on, don't you? You don't spend some time reflecting and thinking, why is this happening? What's the shape of it? And I thought it was quite interesting to think about how you don't put models on post hoc. You try and think about intentionally about what it is that you're setting up to do. And at the start of the programme, we engaged with the Innovation Unit to say, if you had an organisation of this size and you were starting from scratch, what would be the things not to do? What would be the things to aim to do? So it was good to see that probably was one of the factors in our lab, if you like, enduring for as long as it did, is that kind of did try to use a little bit of the evidence, such as it was, about particularly the adoption side of innovation, recognising that our strengths were never going to be necessarily new discovery. It was more about that changing processes to accommodate new ways of working. I think the point really that comes through is that labs need to be judged differently from other interventions, if you like, that the health service often does. And I think that really resonates. So we try to think about things like, if you look at the entrepreneur programme, it's more about how dispirited people become at certain points of their career. It's about engagement with the mission of the health service. It's about retention in the health service. And I think what we're trying to do is make the way we work more inclusive, to say, if you've got a disruptive mindset, if you've got an innovator's approach, such as it might be, or you want to do something outside of the norm, that's okay, and it's good, and we want you to stay here and do that, and we want you to help you to do that. You don't have to go off and be Steve Jobs. You can stay here and actually just make a difference by helping things happen and helping things change. So, and I think in the section around improvement versus innovation, that's where some of the overlap comes, which is that kind of just reaching out and saying, I want things to be better, is a really good place to start for both innovation and quality improvement. So I think that how do we think about what good looks like for these labs? Also, I think the permission aspect is so important. When I say to people, how's it going? They're just like, oh, we're so grateful that somebody's creating an environment where we're allowed to do this stuff, because it's just not the norm. It's just not, particularly now. And there's a comment in there about innovation having been designed out of the current NHS. I think it's got harder. I do think it's got harder, particularly with the focus on productivity, and anything that isn't directly productive being seen to be peripheral, to the core business. Just having that mindset in the organisation, actually innovation is quite close to me. If I ask about it, that's going to be something I'm allowed to do because I know it's present in the organisation. So that's something that came through to me, was this idea of it doesn't need to be a physical space, it doesn't need to be a separate pot of money. A lot of it's about creating the permission and the safe space.
Fantastic, thank you so much. We're going to move on so that we can go into breakout groups, but we'll be hearing from both of you again in a little while. So thanks so much. It was fantastic to hear your insights. Back to you, Zarina.
Thank you, Christina and Anna and Charlotte. Yes, conscious of how much time flies when you're listening and absorbing. So we're going to be shortly moving into breakout groups of around 4 or 5 people, and we'll have around 10 minutes. And really just want you to use the time to connect with others. As I said, there's a lot of experience in the room. So to do a round of introductions and then to discuss the prompt questions on the slide with others. And the questions are fairly broad. They're also ones, you know, we've just been hearing from Anna and Charlotte. So hopefully that will get you thinking. So how do you understand labs, and how has this been informed or not by the evidence review findings? And you may also want to share any other reflections that may be relevant. So we'll pop the questions in the chat box, and you may also want to take a picture of the slides. And I will hand over to Louise, who's going to pop us into breakout groups now.
So we're going to jump straight into kind of the next part of the session rather than spending lots of time now kind of sharing back from things that came up. But obviously, if you've got any reflections that you'd like to share from your conversations, then please do add them to the chat and kind of continue the conversation there. Can I just check that the slides are all coming up okay before I get started? Yeah, perfect. Cool. So for the next part of the session, we're going to be kind of providing more of a focus now on the role of labs and other kind of innovation initiatives in fostering innovation and improvement. And before we kind of dive into the discussion, we wanted to just provide some context about the connection between innovation and improvement, partly because this is something that came up through the evidence review with a really kind of interesting focus, and there's definitely a lot to unpick and unpack there. So I'm just going to start by sharing a few of the messages from the evidence review and how this connects to our kind of organisational perspectives in Kew and the Health Foundation. We'll then hear from Christina about some of what she's picking up from her work with the Innovation Unit, and then we'll hear again from Anna and Charlotte to bring in their perspectives, and then a chance for kind of people to reflect in breakout rooms after that, but we'll cover that when we get there. So the evidence review was looking at the kind of connection between innovation and improvement, obviously through the lens of labs. And it was trying to uncover any evidence about their impact that was relative to other types of innovation and improvement approaches. So trying to work out kind of, should you invest in labs compared to other types of change? And you know, unsurprisingly, and as we heard from Christina, there isn't loads of evidence that can directly answer that. But what the review highlighted was kind of some blurred lines, I guess, between innovation and improvement. And I think it's most obvious when you look at the skills that are needed for both of them, and where there's obviously a huge overlap. So I've just put on the screen here if you can see it. One of the visuals from the evidence review that talks about the skills that are needed for both and the number of similarities between them. And how you see the division between innovation and improvement is definitely influenced by your perspective. And I guess on the one hand, you could see this as just being a debate about semantics. On the other hand, I'd say that the kind of issue of those blurred lines becomes a problem when you're trying to decide what type of activity to support and invest in to respond to the challenge that you're facing, which I think is something that you were naming, Anna, in the first part of this session. And we also know that kind of structurally, when we look at how the health system is set up, there can often be a very big divide. So while kind of individual practitioners may really see the value of both and will use approaches from kind of both sides of this divide, that doesn't normally follow through to the structures that exist within organisations or systems to support innovation and improvement, where the distinction is normally a lot more pronounced. So it's not at all uncommon to have different roles and departments for people who are leading innovation and improvement and transformation, not always completely connected or with the same priorities, depending on the kind of the space people are working in. And there's also often kind of different funding streams set up to foster innovation and improvement in different systems. And I guess that the topic about the relationship between the two is very live for us in the Health Foundation. We've had a long-standing history supporting improvement in the NHS, and have more recently started to broaden our remit to think more about innovation as well. And we see innovation and improvement as both connected, overlapping, and complementary fields of practice. So they both include a deliberate and thoughtful use of methods intended to deliver change. And while they're connected, it obviously doesn't mean that they're completely the same thing. So the fields have definitely developed with distinct strengths, focuses, and cultures. What I've got on the screen here is maybe just some of how they might traditionally be viewed. So innovation is often described as being disruptive and kind of transformational change, focused on the creation of things that are new, so new solutions or interventions. And improvement is often described as being kind of incremental and small scale change. And while I guess there is some truth to this, it is also, I would argue, quite simplistic. And there's maybe a few things that's useful to kind of add into that. Innovation is obviously really valuable when you're looking at the kind of early stages of ideation, prototyping, and development. And it often plays a role working either on the edge or outside of established systems, which as we've heard, I guess, already in this meeting, has some benefits as well as some drawbacks. Improvement then kind of plays a really important role in understanding and optimizing existing structures and systems, and with that real focus on how you kind of embed, scale, and spread changes. And you can see, I think, just from this description, how both are definitely needed. And it's a misnomer to think that you can kind of, I guess, deliver change just through big ideas. Even when something, a radical shift occurs, it's usually built on incremental change over time, and it takes a lot of skills from different people to think about how to achieve that. So it's really clear, I guess, that we need to get much better at how we weave together the strategies that redesign overall kind of models of care and deliver change. So that's, I guess, a bit of a kind of overview of some of how we're looking at this within Q and the foundation. I'll bring in Christina now, because it'd be lovely to just hear from your perspective within the innovation unit, kind of some of what you see about this divide, Christina.
Yeah, thanks, Libby. And I think actually what we find is very similar to what you've just described. I mean, I think one of the things that's really striking, particularly about health and care, is that innovation is often seen as synonymous with technology innovation, and much less around social innovation or thinking more broadly about innovating, developing new kind of models of care or pathways. As you said, innovation and improvement are often seen as very distinct mindsets and practices, and there can be quite a lot of kind of protection and kind of a bit of a hierarchy in some ways, and people kind of elevating certain tools and practices and seeing them as very distinct. And exactly as you said, we generally find that innovation and improvement can often be very separate organisational functions or work streams with different funding as well. What we find more helpfully on the next slide is where organisations or systems, places have a broader kind of take on innovation, and they think about all of the opportunities, whether it's about developing new products, technologies or otherwise, practices, pathways, ways of working, models, systems, and really see it as a way of generating, understanding problems and generating any kind of new ideas. Also, where we see organisations and places seeing innovation and improvement as complementary mindsets and practices that support collaborative design, testing, and implementation of growth on new ideas. Just as you've said, like thinking about both of them start with thinking about how do you really understand a problem and get under the skin of it, and then thinking more broadly about, well, where might there be existing solutions, innovations that we might adopt from elsewhere, what kinds of solutions might work here. Maybe they are more incremental, as you said, or maybe they are more disruptive, but seeing that continuum and working together. And also seeing innovation as a way potentially of unlocking and unblocking kind of some of the stickier challenges that you might find in an improvement process, or indeed, drawing on improvement practices as a way of continuing to test and iterate new innovative ideas. And also, I think we often see very little kind of interconnection across organisational functions, but we find that organisations and places are trying to tackle really big systemic challenges, and that actually where they try to coordinate and sort of maximise the kind of assets that they've got within their system and draw on their innovation, their improvement and other sort of change capabilities, that they're really finding that they've got, more heft to put behind some of those big problems, and really sort of look at how do we, in a coordinated way, try and develop the kind of learning cultures that we know that we need and address some of those really big strategic challenges.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christina. Now I'm going to stop sharing my slides. I think we're going to bring Charlotte and Anna back into the conversation. And if it's okay, Charlotte, I will start with you. So you mentioned obviously in your intro about how you are in the interesting transition between your two organisations. And I'd just love to hear some of your reflections really about kind of when you think about your role in kind of Mid and South Essex, how did you go about that kind of trying to foster innovation and improvement, and I guess the connection or separation that you saw between them? And what are you reflecting on some of the kind of learning that you're wanting to take into your new organisation as you're just starting out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got to be generous, haven't you? And you say with patients, there should be no wrong front door. I think it's the same with people who've got a desire for things to be better, whether it's an innovation approach or something more improvement focused. It doesn't really matter. It's about, as a leader, it's about trying to find that person in the right place for support and help them to understand what they're trying to achieve and be successful. So I think taking that approach is useful, and sort of triaging, if you like, with people who understand what the barriers might be or what the right approaches might be to support that. And I think it's in the report actually, but the view is that most of the time, as my old boss used to say, the people that do the change are people who are already there. Organisations don't turn around because somebody comes in. So a lot of it's really about finding that and building that kind of confidence and competence where you are. I think listening a lot and finding assets, as you might, it's not a very nice term, but you know what I mean, within the organisation, those little kind of pools of inspiration, reserve or opportunity, and putting them together. So I suppose quite pragmatically, and a lot of those do often sit with either the QI team, if you have one, or by people who do improvement. They tend to know where those places are, or they tend to have some insight into the places where the greatest opportunity may reside. So I think using improvement teams, if you have them, or those who have done change successfully, to help uncover the opportunities for innovation will be important. I think you're right about hierarchy, about this idea that research and innovation is somehow more professional, or sometimes perhaps more worth investing in than QI. I think the other side of that is that QI is a lot more accessible and easy to get going and seen as a lot less risky. I think innovation risk is overestimated across the board, and it creates an unnecessary number of procedural barriers to progress. So those are some of the lessons I've learned. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And Anna, I want to now bring you in, I guess, kind of recognising that your perspective is broader than the healthcare system. I'm interested more in kind of your perspective around how we support system change in its kind of broader sense. You spoke earlier about how I guess you kind of worry less about labels and think more about what it is, the type of change people are wanting to deliver, and how they go about that. I guess I'm interested to understand kind of what you see as the role for labs specifically in system change, and also just how you go about supporting people to understand the right route they can take when they understand the nature of the problem that's in front of them.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we have run programs of system change in the health system. And I think that some of these themes are very, over the last 3 or 4 years, keep coming up about the kind of the tension of paradigms. And it also came up in the evidence review about this tension of worldviews. And we talked about it in the breakout there, about the idea that they're either or, that we either save people's lives or we innovate totally new models, and these things, especially when you get to the more systems innovation, more systems change element, they feel like they're higher compromise to the actual kind of day-to-day just improvement and getting on with things. And I think the role of labs can be about holding space to say it's okay, and justifying space to do some of that more transformational work. And that really is important to sort of value it, and to value that this needs to happen, that we need to do yes and, it's not either or, that we need to invest both in the transformational space as well as the improvement, as well as actually just maintaining what we have today and just keeping the lights on. And so that is really important, and we have to recognise that there's some tensions in those paradigms, including, I'm always interested in the monitoring and evaluation questions of how do we value these different roles and the different things that we need to do. What was the second question, Libby, there?
It was about trying to work out how you might go about supporting someone if they came to you in your organisation to understand what might be the right kind of approach for the change that they were being kind of faced with.
Yeah, and that's a lot about the discernment. And we also talk a lot about role fluidity in systems change. So the idea that it's like you not have one role and that role might change and evolve. I mean, that's why I've also called myself the Chief Enabling and Evolving Officer, because there's something about the continual evolution of what your organization needs, what the system needs, what's actually happening. And we get stuck quite organizationally to this is the role, this is what our department does, these are the capabilities we need. And to actually say, well, how is the problem changing? And I think we saw that quite a lot in COVID, right? So how did we innovate in COVID, and how do we try things? And in some ways, there was a real outletting of innovation, but the institutionalization of it is like, does this fit into our current structures? Can we change it? So I think what we often offer for people in the health system, but also in a lot of other systems, is the ability to move from the overwhelm of those choices, move from the overwhelm of those places where to go, and give them kind of systems frameworks and tools to start navigating that and have that fluidity and say, well, actually this year we need to do this, or this month, or just in this situation this is needed. So how do you build in both strategy and processes, and labs I think are a really good part of that have that bit of agility to it and can move and shift and change. And so and then I do like what you were saying there, Charlotte, as well. I think you were sort of saying about this in and out process as well, and we don't focus enough in innovation of the social side of the, when we did some work, and actually somebody from the Health Foundation, and Anandita, who's on this call, it was part of this group. We almost had an action learning set where we were talking about what does it mean to take some of these things into our infertile ground, like you sort of take an innovation and you bring it in. It feels very infertile, right? It doesn't feel very receptive. So this process of engagement, this process of trying to work and facilitate and engage people is just as much the process of innovation or systems change as the process of trying to find what the new thing is, or how do we do it. Actually, the process of scale is actually a process of engagement when we're really talking about social innovations as well, and cultural change. And I actually say we don't pay enough attention to that. So almost there's needing innovation in the process side of things, not just the kind of the process and the change side, not just the kind of what needs to happen in the health system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. Thank you so much. I think for both of you, kind of that, yeah, the relational side of the work and what it takes to do this work is also really coming through, which I think is a really important message. Now, unfortunately, I need to draw this to a close and think about moving on to a breakout group. So we're now going to continue the conversation just in small groups to allow everyone who's on the call to share some of their own perspectives and thoughts, building on what we've just been hearing. So I think Zarina is going to introduce the instructions, and I'll quickly just put the slide on the screen again for us.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks all. Yes, just we'll be in slightly different breakout groups this time, and we'll have 10 minutes. And we'd like you to reflect on similar questions that we've just been asking Anna and Charlotte, which will hopefully have got you thinking. So how are you fostering improvement or innovation in your organisation and systems? What's the unique role and opportunity for labs to support systems change, and how can we maximise the impacts of labs? So we encourage you to self-facilitate if you can, but someone will be there and able to help if you need anything. Hi everyone. Gosh, a huge influx of people. I think everyone's back on the screen. I hope you enjoyed those rapid, quick-fire discussions. I'm so sorry it's gone by so quickly. I'd just want to ask you to pop something in the chat. It's one of your key takeaways from today. So it might have been from something that you'd heard in the presentations, or from Anna and Charlotte, or something that's resonated with you from some of the breakout group discussions. So what's a key takeaway from today? If you could pop this in the chat, that'd be great to see. Lots of room for development. What's the percentage spent in innovation in health and social care? Keep striving to properly embed innovation and consider what successful embedding looks like. Oh, we all knew that. Change is a great idea, but unwelcome by managers as a rule. The importance of culture. Yes, Tanya, different understanding around labs and the importance of embedding in wider ecosystems. Glad, Alison, you are loving seeing the words innovation and improvement together. That's really, really great. Rob saying always learning and need to get always sharing. And yeah, Esther, important for labs to have a clear remit and purpose. Stephen's also shared about Charlotte's point about permission to experiment is so important. Yeah, I'll let you flick up, scroll above at all the thoughts that are coming through. Sorry, we don't have time in plenary to hear more verbally from one another. Yeah, just to thank you all for your time and energy today and participation, Innovation Unit and Charlotte and Anna too. We'll be continuing to use the findings of the evidence review to inform the future strategic direction of the lab. So please do visit our website and keep up to date with our lab learnings and progress to see how we develop over time. Before we close, we've got 3 minutes. So one final ask is just to complete the poll, just to get to understand in the effort of improvement, just to understand how you found the session today. So it should be up on your screen. Sometimes it comes as a pop-up, so it might actually be behind the call. So just asking how you'd rate this as a use of your time and how you expect to apply this learning to your own work. And thank you for your comments in the chat. Really great to have you all here and to have this conversation. If there are any future conversations you want to have on this as well and any further help, do just pop a message in the chat or get in touch. Oh, thank you, Lynn. I don't know if I love my picture. It looks like it's spotlighted for me. I don't know if it is for everyone else, but it's just not really needed. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your participation. Oh, great. Basically everyone has one more person we need. Glad it was really helpful for you all. And finally, yeah, if you haven't already, please do visit our website to find out more about joining Q. If you're not already a member, and to find out more about the lab and our evidence review. And thank you again, and hope you have a good rest of the day.